She came from nowhere with calloused hands and a heart full of quiet dreams. He ruled everything with a name that shaped skylines and a gaze carved from stone. They were never meant to meet, and yet, one night beneath the soft hush of moonlight, their worlds collided. He forgot. She remembered, and from that forgotten night came a little boy with eyes just like his. Now, 3 years later, fate brings them face to face again. But she is no longer invisible, and he is no longer in control. Will he recognize the love he once overlooked? Will she dare to trust the man who once broke her? And what happens when their child asks the one question neither of them is ready to answer? This is not a tale of grand palaces or perfect timing, but of porches warmed by morning light, of hands that learn to hold again, and of love that blooms not in fireworks, but in forgiveness. If you believe that the most beautiful stories are the ones grown from silence, from second chances, and the softest kind of courage, then this story is for you. Before we begin, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories, where every tale reminds us that even the quietest hearts still deserve to be heard. Now, lean in close. Let's begin. Hello, dear listeners of the Shining Hearts series. Today, we invite you into a story of quiet love, unspoken longing, and two souls that never expected to collide. If you're new here, don't forget to follow us so you never miss a story that might just reach into your heart. Perched on a secluded ridge overlooking the glimmering skyline of Eastbourne City, the Wyndham Manor stood still beneath the pale light of an October moon. Majestic in design yet cold in spirit, it was a fortress of steel and stone glass walls stretching from floor to ceiling, reflecting a wealth built on power, not passion. To Elena Carter, a 23-year-old woman from the sun-baked plains of rural Nebraska, it was both a chance and a cage. She had arrived half a year ago with little more than a faded suitcase and a fragile hope for a future far removed from the dusty roads and whispered pity of the town she had left behind. Elena knew hardship intimately. Orphaned at just 9, she had bounced from one foster home to another, never quite fitting in, never truly wanted. She learned early that dreaming was dangerous when no one fought to make dreams come true. With chestnut hair always neatly pulled back and eyes soft as dusk over a quiet lake, she held a kind of beauty that didn't ask to be noticed. Her smile rarely surfaced, and only in the quiet while tending the herb garden tucked behind the servant's wing or pouring her thoughts into a tattered journal that held the life she had not yet lived. She dreamed of a porch swing beneath a maple tree, the smell of fresh bread in a kitchen she called her own, and the eyes of someone who truly saw her. But for now, all she had was the coarse gray apron she wore, the endless list of chores, and the discipline of being unseen in the vast halls of Adrian Wyndham's estate. Adrian, 35, was a man who moved the world as though it owed him obedience. As CEO of Wyndham Holdings, he had transformed a family business into a real estate empire that shaped skylines across continents. Towering, sharp-jawed, with jet-black hair and an aura carved from stone, he moved through life like someone untouched by failure. But beneath the elegance of tailored suits and boardroom brilliance lay a man scorched by betrayal. 3 years ago, his wife, a luminous starlet on the rise, had left him for a rival tycoon, and in doing so, took half of his belief in human goodness with her. Since then, Adrian lived by one unbending rule: everything could be bought. Emotions were liabilities. His office lit the manor's highest wing like a lighthouse in the night papers stacked high, whiskey half-finished, and him always alone. Wyndham Manor was more than his residence. It was a wall. For Elena, it was survival, her only path forward. For Adrian, it was refuge, a fortress built not from fear, but from disappointment. Their lives ran parallel, almost never touching. Elena glided through corridors like mist, careful and silent. Adrian's presence, in contrast, carried a weight that shifted the air when he passed. She never dared to meet his eyes. A girl from nowhere, polishing chandeliers for a man who could buy her whole hometown. But sometimes, just sometimes, when she glimpsed him through the windows, shoulders slumped as he stared into nothing. She wondered if he, too, was longing for more than what money could ever provide. As autumn descended in waves of amber and gold, Elena stood in the herb garden, her palms scented faintly with rosemary. She gazed up at the glowing silhouette of the manor, whispered to herself beneath the fading sky one day, "I'll build something that's mine," far above, in his study. Adrian paused mid-sentence, pen hovering above paper. Something unspoken stirred in his chest. He looked out the window, not knowing that just beyond the ivy-covered wall, a girl with calloused hands and quiet eyes had begun to rewrite both of their destinies. She looked up at the glowing silhouette of Wyndham Manor as dusk embraced the sky, her breath curling in the cool autumn air. "Someday, I'll build something that's mine," Elena whispered, the words soft but fiercely rooted. High above, in the sleek quiet of his office, Adrian Wyndham paused mid-sentence, the pen still in his hand. His gaze lifted to the fading light beyond the glass, and for the briefest moment, something long buried stirred in his chest, a hollow ache he had long ago mistaken for silence. Neither of them knew then that destiny had already begun to braid their lives together, thread by thread, with tenderness, with pain, with the quiet promise of something neither of them dared to name. Autumn drifted over the estate like a hush, with golden leaves swirling across the stone pathways and the scent of firewood clinging to the edges of the grand hall. Inside, the manor glowed in muted warmth, yet remained untouched by it. Elena, with her gray apron cinched tightly at the waist, moved like a breeze through the endless corridors, ever present, never truly seen. She polished floor-to-ceiling windows until they gleamed, trimmed roses for porcelain vases, and arranged coffee trays for the CEO's guests, all with the grace of someone who knew this job was her only escape from the shadows of her past. But in quiet corners, while dusting library shelves or sweeping the flagstone courtyard, her thoughts wandered dangerously so to the man whose name she only ever whispered in her mind. Adrian Wyndham wasn't the kind of man you approached. He swept through the manor with the weight of a storm, precise, powerful, and always a few steps ahead of the world. The staff spoke of him in hushed tones, a mastermind, a man who demanded perfection, someone who hadn't trusted another soul since the day his glamorous wife left him behind. But Elena saw something deeper, something quieter. She noticed it in moments no one else did late at night, when she passed the study and glimpsed him slouched at his desk, eyes distant, fingers absently spinning a jazz record. The label was faded, the music slow, aching, and mournful whispered stories his voice never told. One morning, as Elena set a tray of warm butter cookies on the kitchen counter, she heard familiar footsteps measured, deliberate. Adrian appeared in the doorway, dressed in his usual ash-gray suit, though his eyes bore the weight of a sleepless night. His gaze landed on the cookies. Without a word, he picked one up, took a bite, and paused. "Who made these?" he asked, his voice low but not unkind. Startled, Elena dropped her cloth with a soft thud. I did. "Sir," she said quickly, eyes trained on the floor. Adrian gave a small nod. He turned to leave but paused at the door, his eyes flicking back for just a breath longer than necessary. "They're good," he said quietly, then vanished into the hallway. Elena stood frozen, her heartbeat racing like a trapped bird. She scolded herself silently for letting one small sentence feel like the sun had broken through a long winter. Those fleeting exchanges felt like pebbles dropped into the still pool of her heart, stirring emotions she didn't dare give voice to. Another time, she was gathering scattered papers in the study, unaware that Adrian had returned. He entered silently, sat down, and pressed play on the old jazz record again. His voice, low and almost wistful, murmured something about how things used to be. When Elena rose too quickly and knocked over a book, the noise startled him. His eyes met hers, momentarily confused. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not in anger, but with genuine surprise. "Just tidying up, sir," she replied, lowering her gaze, book clutched to her chest. She bent quickly to retrieve the fallen book, her fingers trembling slightly. As she rose, Adrian studied her for a moment quiet, observant, then gestured toward the record player on his desk. "Do you like jazz, Miss?" he asked. Then he paused, realizing he didn't even know her name. "Elena, sir." "Elena Carter," she replied, her cheeks coloring. "And not really. I haven't heard much of it." Adrian nodded once, offering no further words, but as Elena turned to leave, she could feel it, his gaze lingering on her just a second too long, as if for the first time, he saw more than just a housemaid in the shadows. Those rare encounters, short and seemingly inconsequential, began to stir something inside her. A quiet unrest, a dangerous hope. She found herself noticing him more. The way his hand would run through his hair when decisions weighed heavy on him. The way he'd stand alone on the rain-slicked balcony late at night, his shirt soaked, unmoved by the storm. In him. She saw a kind of aloneness that mirrored her own, the kind that made her curl into her blanket at night and wonder if anyone in the world would ever see her as more than a passer-by. But reality was a wall she couldn't scale. He was Adrian Wyndham, a man who shaped skylines and signatures, and she was just Elena, an orphan, with work-worn hands and a notebook full of silent wishes. One evening, while organizing files in the study, her hand brushed against something beneath a pile of documents. She pulled out a familiar item, the old jazz record. The faded label read, "Kind of Blue." She turned it over slowly, imagining Adrian alone in this very room, letting the soft ache of trumpet and piano fill the silence he couldn't explain. Without meaning to. She tucked the record into the pocket of her apron, a quiet keepsake, like holding a piece of someone else's sadness close. That night, in the solitude of her tiny room, she opened her journal and wrote, "He's not the man they say he is. Not all cold steel and numbers. He's alone. Like me. But who am I to think he'd ever truly see me?" She closed the journal, as if to close off the thought itself. The feeling was reckless, and feelings like that never ended well. Adrian Wyndham lived in a world built from granite and glass, a world that had no place for a girl who once shared a bedroom with 3 other foster children. But the heart, it doesn't follow logic. Just like the jazz he played at midnight, the heart drifts where it chooses. As October deepened, the winds turned sharp and the evenings stretched long. One night, Wyndham Manor lit up like something out of a dream. From the golden-lit ballroom windows spilled soft, flickering light that danced across the misty lawn. It was the night of Adrian's grand business gala. Luxury cars lined the curved drive, strings of music floated from inside violins, laughter, and the soft clinking of crystal glasses. Elena moved among the crowd, dressed not in her usual apron, but in a simple black dress provided to the service staff for the occasion. With her chestnut hair unbound and her eyes catching hints of chandelier light, she looked entirely different. Yet to the guests, she was still invisible. Always in the background clearing plates, resetting napkins, adjusting tablecloths. Still, Her chest ached with an unfamiliar heaviness. Just moments before, she'd seen Adrian standing near the bar, his sharp black suit tailored to perfection, a rare smile curling on his lips as he toasted with an investor. He looked untouchable, irresistible. She turned away quickly, scrubbing at a dark wine stain on a white linen tablecloth, trying to erase the heat in her cheeks. But then she heard it words tossed carelessly, like knives. "You need to loosen up. Wyndham, I know a place. I'll send someone over tonight." Adrian didn't reply, just smirked slightly, raised his glass. But the comment twisted something inside Elena, like a cold hand pressing against her heart. Later, when the music faded and the last guest disappeared into the night, the grand estate fell back into its solemn quiet. But what happened next, Elena couldn't have foreseen. The last echoes of laughter and music faded from Wyndham Manor, leaving only silence, a thick, heavy silence that fell over the estate like a drawn curtain. Elena remained behind, as always, cleaning long after the guests had gone. Her footsteps barely made a sound on the cool marble floor. In the kitchen, the final crystal glass shimmered in her hand as she wiped it gently, her mind drifting elsewhere. Then she heard them. Slow, uneven footsteps. She turned and froze. Adrian stood in the doorway, his jacket missing, shirt slightly unbuttoned, and dark hair tousled from his fingers. A glass of whiskey dangled from his hand. His eyes were distant, unfocused, shadowed by something deeper than drink. When he looked at her, it wasn't with recognition, not as an employer, not even as a man seeing a woman. It was something far more hollow. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough, broken at the edges. "They said someone would come." Elena gripped the cloth in her hands, her body tensing. "Sir, it's me, Elena. I'm just cleaning," she said softly, her voice trembling. But Adrian didn't seem to hear. His brows drew together in confusion, or maybe pain. He stepped closer, tall and imposing, his shadow stretching across the kitchen tile. "Don't pretend," he whispered, the words heavy with despair. "He said he'd send someone. Isn't that what you're here for?" His gaze pierced her. "Money, is that it? How much for one night?" The words cut deep. Elena's back met the edge of the counter as she instinctively stepped away. Her breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Wyndham, please, I'm not that kind of woman. I'm just a maid." She wanted to run, she wanted to scream, but she didn't, because behind the whiskey and the confusion, behind the cold slur of his words, were the same eyes she'd seen staring out at the storm from the balcony, the same aching soul she heard in every low jazz note echoing through his study, the same loneliness she knew all too well. He stepped closer, the scent of cologne and whiskey wrapped around her like smoke. "Don't be afraid," he said, voice softer now, pleading, almost broken. He reached up, touched her cheek. His fingers were cool. His eyes burned. "I won't hurt you." Elena stood still, her mind screaming for distance, for sense. She knew he didn't see her. Not really. Not Elena Carter, the girl who still wrote dreams into the pages of her journal. To him, she was only comfort, a moment, a shadow to fill the hollow. But her heart, the heart that had quietly fallen for him in hidden moments and quiet kindnesses, it betrayed her. In his fractured gaze, she saw not a powerful man, but a lost one, and she loved him. Even knowing that loving him could only break her. When he whispered her name, it was like hearing it for the first time. "Elena." Then his arms were around her, his mouth found hers urgent, searching. She didn't resist. She closed her eyes, surrendering to a kiss that tasted of longing and sorrow. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, unseen in the hush of the night. That kiss carried everything she had buried deep, every silent hope, every whispered wish, every ache of being unseen. Later, in the soft light of the master bedroom, moonlight filtered through the white curtains, casting silver across the bed. Adrian undressed her slowly, not with fury, but with a strange, trembling tenderness. Elena shivered under his touch, caught between fear and the ache to be held, to be wanted. When he whispered her name again, she didn't know if it was truly her he was calling for or someone lost in his past, but she didn't care. Just once, she wanted to belong to him, even if only for one night beneath the moon. When it was over, they lay in the quiet. Adrian had fallen asleep, his face relaxed, no longer the man behind a boardroom wall, just a man, breathing softly beside her. Elena watched him, her body aching, her heart slowly unraveling, because she knew, deep down, this moment was never really hers to keep. She watched him in the hush of moonlight, memorizing everything his profile against the silver glow, the rise and fall of his breath, the quiet warmth of his body beside hers. Her tears slipped silently, not only for what she had given him, but for the truth she already knew this moment, like a dream, would dissolve with the morning light, exhausted and aching. Elena closed her eyes and let sleep take her because she didn't have the strength to walk away. Dawn came pale and cold, bleeding softly through the white curtains. She stirred slowly, every part of her body sore, her heart unbearably heavy. But he was already awake. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed, back to her, his hair tousled, his face unreadable as he stared at his phone. When he finally turned to her, his gaze was sharp, dispassionate, his voice colder still. "You're still here," he said, as if surprised. A cruel smirk tugged at his lips. "Don't think one night in my bed means anything." Elena froze. Her breath caught. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Nothing could form past the numbness closing in on her chest. Adrian didn't look at her again. He scrolled through messages like she wasn't even in the room. Then, still not meeting her eyes, he added casually, "Just tell me how much you want. I don't do games." The words shattered her. Each syllable struck like glass, slicing through what little hope she'd carried. She had given herself to him not for gain, not for status, but because she had felt something real, even if she'd known it couldn't last. And now, he had reduced her to a transaction, a night, a price. Her blood ran cold. Her breath came in shallow fragments, but she didn't cry. Not because she was strong, but because the pain had passed tears. It lived deeper than that. In silence, she rose, her hands trembling as she reached for the crumpled black dress on the floor. She pulled it over her bruised heart, button by button, every movement a quiet goodbye. Adrian glanced at her briefly, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes, nothing more. No apology, no regret. "I'll be leaving," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet steady. "Thank you for everything." Then she turned and walked away, each step heavy, as if the world beneath her was crumbling with every footfall. Adrian didn't stop her. He stood there, motionless, watching her fragile figure fade through the doorway. Something stirred in his chest, a strange discomfort, but he brushed it off. Just a girl. A moment. Nothing more. Back in her tiny room, Elena collapsed onto her narrow bed, clutching the pillow to her chest. Only then did the sobs escape. Not just for her body, but for her dignity, for her heart, for being seen as someone who could be bought. She couldn't stay. Not after this. With trembling hands, she wrote a short note, "Dear Mr. Wyndham, I resign effective immediately." Thank you for the opportunity, Elena Carter. She left it on the kitchen counter where the housekeeper would find it. Then she packed her old suitcase, worn, familiar, the last piece of her past, and stepped out into the early morning mist. At the gates of Wyndham Manor, she stopped and looked back one last time. Her eyes rose to the window of his room, where a soft light still glowed behind the curtains. "Goodbye, Adrian," she whispered, the words carrying everything she didn't say. Then she turned away, not knowing that this night had not only broken something in her, but had also set into motion a future neither of them could have foreseen. 3 years later, the quiet town of Meadowbrook, nestled beside a winding river in northern Vermont, had become Elena's sanctuary. Cobblestone streets lined with weathered lampposts, whitewashed cottages, and wide fields scattered with wildflowers made the town feel like a place untouched by time. Here, no one asked where she had come from. No one looked at her and saw sorrow, and no one knew about the man she sometimes glimpsed in her son's eyes. Meadowbrook was where Elena rebuilt her life not for herself, but for the little boy who had become her entire world. With nothing but a worn suitcase and a few $100s saved from her time at Wyndham Manor, Elena Carter arrived in the town of Meadowbrook like a leaf carried by the wind, tired, aimless, and quietly desperate for a place to start over. It was May, the kind-hearted elderly woman with silver hair and soft eyes, who took one look at Elena and opened the door that would change everything. "You look like someone who needs a fresh beginning," May had said, pressing a clean apron into Elena's hands and gesturing toward the warm interior of Morning Light Bakery, nestled along the cobbled stretch of Main Street. May offered her more than just a job frosting cupcakes. She introduced her to a kindly landlord who rented her a modest upstairs apartment above a wooden florist shop. It was small, but affordable. And for Elena, it was enough. From there, she learned to knead dough with patience, bake bread until golden brown, and pipe soft swirls of icing onto cakes with care. Each morning, the scent of cinnamon and butter slowly erased the past, one loaf at a time, and through it all, there was Lucas, her son, her light. With jet-black hair and wide, gray eyes that shimmered with mischief, Lucas was the very echo of Adrian Wyndham, so much so that sometimes, when she brushed the boy's hair and caught sight of the tiny teardrop-shaped birthmark behind his ear, her breath would hitch. But Lucas wasn't just a reflection of the man she had left behind. He was vibrant and curious, bursting with energy and wide-eyed dreams. "Mom, I'm going to fly to the moon," he'd shout, swinging a plastic stick like a lightsaber as he dashed across the living room, while Elena scooped him into her arms with a laugh. When he'd ask softly, "Do I have a daddy?" she would smile, tuck his hair behind his ear, and say, "You have me, sweetheart, and I love you more than the whole universe. Isn't that enough?" And Lucas, pure, trusting, would always nod, then run off to draw another picture of his astronaut adventures. Life in Meadowbrook was far from easy. At 25, raising a child alone meant stretching every dollar. Most nights, after Lucas had fallen asleep clutching a stuffed bear, Elena sat at the kitchen table, poring over bills in the dim light, biting her lip to keep her worries silent. But she never let the weariness steal her joy. Joy came in the quiet, in Lucas's laughter as they played catch in the backyard, in the rich smell of apple pie cooling on the counter, and in the bedtime stories she made up of dinosaurs who danced on the moon and stars that could sing. Morning Light Bakery became her refuge, her rhythm, her reason to rise. She found comfort in flour-dusted hands and the warmth of ovens glowing at dawn. The way customers smiled when they tasted her pastries gave her purpose. May, ever gentle, became something like a mother. She never pushed, never pried. Only once did Elena mention the past when May asked, one rainy evening, if Lucas's father was part of their life. Elena turned toward the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's not a bad man," she said, "but he doesn't belong to us." May said nothing more, just placed a soft hand on Elena's shoulder and let silence be enough. Still, some ghosts refused to be buried. Every now and then, when Lucas tilted his head while laughing, or when he narrowed his eyes in thought, Adrian's face would flash through her mind, the man who once stood on a rain-soaked balcony, too lonely to admit it. She sometimes wondered just for a breath if he ever thought of her, if he ever imagined what might have been. But then, she would push the thought away. She was no longer the invisible maid at Wyndham Manor. She was a mother now. She was strength wrapped in gentleness. She had learned how to stand, even if the ground had once broken beneath her feet. That afternoon, the golden light of sunset stretched across Meadowbrook, bathing the storefronts in amber glow. Morning Light Bakery, with its carved wood sign and the scent of cinnamon sugar wafting through the air, drew people in like a lullaby. Behind the counter stood Elena, her short brown hair tucked behind her ears, her white apron dusted with flour, and for the first time in a long while, she felt steady. 3 years in Meadowbrook had reshaped Elena Carter. She was no longer the quiet, invisible girl scrubbing silver in the halls of Wyndham Manor. Now, she moved with a gentle confidence, her posture calm and grounded, though the sadness in her ocean-blue eyes had never fully left. She smiled warmly as she handed a box of cookies to an elderly woman at the counter, her hands dusted with flour. But even in that moment, her heart was elsewhere watching Lucas, her 3-year-old son, seated in the corner by the playmat, drawing superheroes with fierce concentration. Then, the bell above the bakery door jingled. Elena looked up, prepared to greet whoever entered with her usual soft charm, but the moment her eyes landed on the man who stepped inside, the smile drained from her face. The room seemed to hold its breath. Adrian Wyndham. Dressed in a tailored black suit, his dark hair perfectly combed back, his steel-gray eyes swept across the bakery like they were taking inventory of every detail. The same man who had once broken her into pieces now stood just feet away, though time had changed him, too. There were new lines near his eyes, a heaviness in his expression that hadn't been there before, a weariness, like the weight of something he could never quite set down. Elena dropped her gaze quickly, pretending to wipe the countertop. Her hands trembled so hard she nearly knocked over a jar of cinnamon sticks. "Please don't recognize me," she thought. "Just buy your bread and go." Adrian hadn't come to Meadowbrook looking for her. Wyndham Holdings was scouting land near the river for a new luxury resort. He had simply followed the scent of butter cookies into Morning Light Bakery, unaware that fate had led him exactly where it needed to. He approached the counter, eyes drifting across the pastries, but his gaze kept returning to her. There was something familiar. The softness in her voice as she spoke to a customer, the flicker of blue in her eyes. 3 years ago, she had been just a background figure, a housemaid in gray, a shadow in polished hallways. But this woman, this calm, flour-dusted baker with short hair and steady grace, felt entirely different. "A loaf of barley bread," Adrian said, his voice smooth and commanding, though his eyes stayed trained on the display. "Make it quick." Elena nodded without a word, avoiding his eyes. Her hands were icy as she reached for the bread, wrapped it tightly in brown paper, and pushed it gently across the counter. "Here you go, sir," she murmured, barely louder than the rustle of the bag. He dropped a few coins on the counter and turned to leave, but then a small voice pierced the air. "Mommy." "I finished my drawing." Adrian stopped mid-step. Lucas, wrapped in a sky-blue sweater, bounded out of the play corner, his dark curls bouncing, a crumpled piece of paper gripped in one tiny hand. "Look," he beamed, "it's you. Me. And our spaceship. Elena knelt, pulling him into her arms, trying to hide the tremble in her hands. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," she whispered, her throat tight. She felt Adrian's eyes on them before she dared to look. Slowly, she rose, placing herself between the man who once wounded her and the child who had saved her. Adrian stood motionless, his coffee forgotten in his grip. He stared at Lucas with a strange, hollow intensity, like he was staring into a mirror from a lifetime ago. The boy's eyes, that crooked smile. Then Lucas turned his head, and a small birthmark behind his ear caught the light, a teardrop-shaped mark. Adrian's hand lifted unconsciously, touching the exact same spot behind his own ear. His heart lurched. Something primal twisted in his chest, an emotion so raw, so sharp, it nearly stole his breath. A suspicion was forming, one that felt terrifying in its clarity. Adrian stared at Lucas, the boy's laughter still echoing faintly in his ears, and then slowly turned his gaze back to Elena. In that instant, it all clicked. The quiet maid from the manor. The girl who baked those butter cookies. The one who whispered to him about jazz in the silence of a late-night study. It was her, Elena Carter. His voice cracked with disbelief. Elena. She stood straighter, chin slightly lifted, her expression unreadable. Whatever softness had once colored her gaze was gone, buried beneath 3 years of strength built from heartbreak. "Good afternoon, Mr. Wyndham," she said, her tone even detached. "Can I help you with anything else?" The name Mr. Wyndham struck harder than any accusation. The distance in her eyes, the wall she had rebuilt brick by brick, left him speechless. He wanted to ask how she ended up here, why she had left, why she hadn't said a word. But then his eyes returned to the boy, and the words died in his throat. "Lucas, sweetheart," Elena said gently, "go show your drawing to Miss May." "Okay." The older woman had just emerged from the back kitchen, her warm smile faltering as she sensed the tension. Lucas nodded and trotted over, his drawing still clutched tightly in one hand. Elena turned back to Adrian, her arms crossed now, not in defiance, but protection. "If you're not buying anything else," she said, voice firm, "please leave. I have work to do." Adrian stepped closer to the counter, his voice low, almost pleading. "Elena, we need to talk. I didn't know you were here. I didn't know." He trailed off. His eyes flicked again to Lucas. The resemblance was too much. Too real. It terrified him. Elena let out a hollow, humorless laugh. "Talk," she echoed, bitterness curling around each syllable. "You don't even remember, do you? I was just a mistake. One night blurred by whiskey and grief. There's nothing left to say." Her words landed like a blade, and somewhere in the deepest part of him, he felt it regret, raw and unrelenting. He remembered that night now, her voice trembling, her hands shaking, the pain in her eyes as she left, and now, seeing her here, no longer a maid but a mother, with strength in her spine and sorrow still in her gaze, it broke something inside him. His eyes moved again to the boy. That face. Those eyes. "Could it be don't?" Elena said sharply, her voice cold. "Don't ask what you have no right to ask. You had your life. Your world. You made it clear I was never part of it." Adrian wanted to argue. He wanted to ask if Lucas was his son, if she had truly walked away without ever needing anything from him. But one look at her, the pain, the guarded dignity silenced him. He turned, the weight of silence pressing down on each step as he walked to the door. He paused, looking back through the window. Inside. Elena knelt beside Lucas, her smile tender and full of love. It was the kind of smile he had never seen on her face when she lived in his mansion. And for the first time in years, Adrian Wyndham felt something he hadn't known he was capable of anymore. Fear. Fear that he had lost something. No. Someone. He would never be able to get back. Under the gray skies of Meadowbrook, Adrian sat alone in a small temporary office set up near the riverside property where the resort was to be built. The space was sterile plain walls, a wooden desk, and the bitter scent of stale coffee. It was nothing like his usual city suite. But what lay on the desk in front of him shook him far more than any unfamiliar surroundings. 3 days had passed since that moment in the bakery, and now, the report from the private investigator sat before him. Each page burned like fire in his hands. The findings were clear. Elena Carter, 25, had been living in Meadowbrook for 3 years. She worked at Morning Light Bakery. She had one child, Lucas Carter, born August 15th. No father listed on the birth certificate. Adrian's eyes stopped on a line in the medical report, blood type AB negative, the same as his. Then he opened the attached photograph, a grainy shot, taken discreetly from a distance, of Lucas playing near the river with a paper rocket. In it, just visible behind the boy's ear, was the unmistakable teardrop-shaped birthmark, just like his own. Adrian's hands trembled. There was no need for a test. Lucas was his son. The photograph said it all, the teardrop-shaped birthmark, barely visible behind Lucas's ear, identical to the one behind Adrian's own. No test was needed. No doubts remained. Lucas was his son. Adrian closed the file with shaking hands, his knuckles white against the grain of the desk. The truth settled like thunder in his chest. He stood, walked to the window of his temporary office, and stared down the road that led into the heart of Meadowbrook. From a distance, he could see the warm glow of Morning Light Bakery, the small shop that smelled of sugar and resilience. Images swarmed his mind. Lucas with those bright gray eyes, that mischievous grin, the way he waved his arms when talking about spaceships, his voice high with excitement. The boy was like a reflection from Adrian's own forgotten childhood, carefree and dreaming, and Elena, the woman he had once dismissed, the woman who had carried his child alone, who had raised that child with grace, never asking for a single thing, not even a name on a certificate. The realization gutted him. His armor, the arrogance, the control, the wealth meant nothing here. Not when the boy who carried his blood had grown up without his father. Not when the woman who had once looked at him with quiet hope now barely acknowledged him. He sat down and buried his face in his hands. His mind returned to that night 3 years ago. The haze of whiskey. The sting of a friend's cruel joke. The confusion, the desperation, and Elena's eyes, wide with fear but still filled with kindness. And then, the next morning, the harsh words, the cold dismissal. Don't think one night gives you the right to ask anything from me. He hadn't just pushed her away. He had erased her, treated her like nothing more than a passing mistake. But seeing her again, strong, composed, and fiercely protective of their son, it unraveled him. A few days later, Adrian returned to the bakery, not for bread or pastries, but for answers. He found May in the back kitchen, surrounded by flour-dusted counters and the warm scent of vanilla. "I'd like to ask you something," he said, his voice calm but tight. "About Elena." May looked up, reading him in an instant. "She's one of the strongest women I've ever met," she said, with quiet pride. "Came here with nothing but a bag and a baby in her belly. Never once asked for help. She built her life around that boy, and she gives him everything." She paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "She deserves to be happy. You know." Those words struck harder than any accusation. Adrian left the bakery slowly. his steps heavy on the cobbled stones. The guilt trailed him like a shadow. That night, in his rented room, he searched through the bottom of his suitcase and found it the old jazz CD, kind of blue, the same one he'd once caught Elena holding in the library, years ago. The label was worn, the disc scratched, but it still played. He let the haunting notes drift through the silence. For the first time in years, Adrian didn't feel powerful. He didn't feel in control. He felt small. He had been wrong to treat her like a transaction, wrong to let his own pain blind him, wrong to let his child grow up in a world where his father was only an empty space. In the days that followed, Adrian stayed on the edges of their lives watching, but never approaching. He stood across from the bakery in the early mornings, watching Elena walk Lucas to the local daycare. The boy would skip ahead, waving his drawings in the air, bursting with joy. Adrian watched them from behind windows and down quiet sidewalks. He saw the way Elena looked at her son, soft, proud, complete. At the daycare playground, he stood behind the fence, watching Lucas chase his friends. The boy's laughter rang out like sunlight, and Adrian's heart broke a little more each time. He wanted to reach out, to kneel down and tell Lucas the truth. "I'm your father. I've missed every day of your life." But he didn't. Not because he was afraid of Elena's rejection, but because he knew he hadn't earned the right to speak those words. Not yet. Still, Adrian couldn't sit idle. Slowly, carefully, he began to take steps. He contacted the hospital where Lucas had been born, leveraging his network to quietly access old records. Not to interfere, but to understand. Because for the first time in his life, Adrian Wyndham wasn't chasing power. He was chasing redemption. The report confirmed what Adrian Wyndham feared. Elena had gone into early labor alone, spending 2 long weeks in the hospital recovering from exhaustion. No visitors, no family, just her and a fragile newborn in a sterile room filled with silence. The image of her young, frightened, cradling their child in the flickering light of a hospital ward made it hard for him to breathe. He picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Place a regular order," he said quietly. "From Morning Light Bakery. Pastries for the weekly meetings. No notes, no names." It was a small gesture, a silent way of supporting her, a step. He also sent a gift to Lucas, a small blue bicycle delivered through May, labeled only as from a loyal customer. No explanations. Just kindness, wrapped in anonymity. Each night, Adrian sat alone in his hotel room, the city lights far dimmer than the photograph in his hands, the one the investigator had sent him, Elena and Lucas walking by the river, the boy clutching a wildflower, his face turned upward in pure joy. Adrian had tried to write her a letter once, an apology. He got as far as the 3rd line before he crumpled it into his fist. Words, he realized, could never repair what actions had broken. He turned to the window, where the warm lights of the bakery glowed like distant stars. "I won't lose you both again," he whispered. "I won't." The path forward wouldn't be easy. Elena's eyes had told him that much, cold, cautious, unreadable. But he would walk it anyway. Not just for the boy, not just for her, but for the man he still believed he could become. For the first time in his life, he wanted to be good. Winter descended on Meadowbrook like a whispered lullaby. Snow blanketed the town in soft white, shimmering like powdered sugar beneath strings of lanterns and the laughter of children. The annual winter fair had transformed the cobbled streets into something out of a postcard. Wooden stalls adorned with handmade crafts, gingerbread scents dancing in the air, cups of steaming apple cider passed hand to hand, and there, among the soft swirl of snowflakes, Elena, Adrian, and Lucas walked side by side, something Elena could never have imagined even weeks ago. In the days since their encounter, Adrian had been present. He stopped by the bakery often, ordered pastries, spoke with May. He never pushed, never pried, just small conversations, steady and sincere. When he spoke to Elena, he was patient, careful. At first, her answers were clipped, her tone defensive. But slowly, like ice melting under morning sun, her walls began to shift. One day, he returned a baseball that had rolled out from the park. Another time, a picture book about astronauts arrived for Lucas, slipped into a brown envelope with no name. Mom, the man from the bakery knows I love space. Lucas squealed with delight, hugging the book to his chest. Despite herself, Elena noticed Adrian never overstepped, never used the boy as leverage. And Lucas, he liked him. That was undeniable. When Adrian invited them to the winter fair, Elena hesitated, but May nudged her gently. Go, she said. You won't be alone. I'll stay nearby. And so, under the amber glow of lanterns, they walked together through the fair, Elena holding Lucas's hand tightly, never letting her guard drop, while Adrian kept pace beside them, his smile quiet, almost grateful. Lucas bounced between them, cheeks red from the cold, eyes wide with wonder, at the ring toss booth. He squealed when he won a stuffed bear, and again when Adrian bought him cotton candy that seemed larger than his face. Mr. Adrian, this is huge. He laughed, sugar dusting his lips. Elena stood nearby, hands in her coat pockets, her eyes cautious, but when she looked at Lucas's joy, a small smile slipped through. They stopped at a booth selling hot apple cider. Adrian stepped forward to buy 3 steaming cups, while Lucas tugged on Elena's coat. Eyes locked on a colorful ice cream cart just a few steps away, the roof dotted with spinning balloons. Mom, I want a balloon, Lucas said, tugging eagerly at Elena's hand, his eyes wide with wonder. She smiled, tightening her grip gently. We'll get one later, sweetheart, she promised, brushing a strand of his hair from his forehead. Just then, her phone rang. It was May, breathless on the other end. Elena, the oven just broke completely. There's smoke everywhere. I need you at the bakery. Now. Elena hesitated, her eyes shifting from the phone to Lucas, who clutched his stuffed bear, his face still lit up from the fair's magic. I don't want to go. He pouted. The fair is so much fun. Just as Adrian returned with 3 steaming cups of cider, he overheard the exchange. Elena, he said gently, I can stay with him. Just for an hour. I'll keep him safe. You can come back once everything's okay. She shook her head instinctively, but Lucas tugged at her hand again, his eyes pleading. Mom, I want to stay with Mr. Adrian. Elena's eyes met Adrian's, his expression steady, earnest. After a long, tense pause, she finally nodded, her voice firm. 1 hour, and don't let him out of your sight. I won't, Adrian promised. Elena turned and hurried off into the snowy streets, her heart pounding with unease, praying she had made the right decision. Meanwhile, Adrian guided Lucas through the colorful stalls, doing his best to keep the boy entertained, pointing out carved wooden toys and letting him try small games. At one booth, Lucas excitedly tossed rings toward glass bottles, his laugh bubbling up as the attendant cheered him on. That's when it happened. A man in a long coat stepped forward, tapping Adrian on the shoulder. Wyndham. Just the man I needed to see, about that contract on the east lot. Adrian hesitated. It would only take a minute, just a quick update. He glanced back at Lucas, still tossing rings, still laughing, and turned to listen. But in that brief moment, Lucas saw a red balloon bobbing through the crowd. Enchanted, he followed it, little boots crunching on snow slipping silently away from the booth. Lucas Adrian called, turning back. No answer. He spun around. Lucas. The fair's music blurred into chaotic noise. Lights flashed. Faces turned, but none of them were Lucas's. Adrian's heart thundered in his chest. He ran to the nearest vendor. "Have you seen a little boy, blue coat, dark hair?" A couple shook their heads. No one had seen anything. Adrian's hands trembled as he pulled out his phone. "Elena," he said, breath shallow. "It's Lucas. He's gone. I'm looking, please." "Come now." Back at the bakery. Elena had just gotten the oven working again, but when she heard Adrian's voice frantic, broken, her whole body went cold. She dropped the wrench, sprinted from the kitchen, and ran through the snowy streets like her soul was on fire. When she reached the fairgrounds, her eyes scanned the sea of people until she saw him, Adrian, hair tousled, face pale, searching madly. "I'm so sorry," he stammered when he saw her. I looked away for just a second. She didn't wait. Elena dashed between booths, screaming her son's name. "Lucas, Lucas." Her voice cracked, raw with fear. He was her everything. Her reason for waking. Her reason for surviving. Then faintly she heard it. A soft sob near the edge of the parking lot. She bolted toward the sound and found a man, swaying and reeking of alcohol, gripping Lucas's arm. "There you are," the man slurred. "You ran off from Grandpa again, didn't you?" Elena's heart stopped. "Let go of my son," she screamed. Startled, the man released Lucas, stumbling backward. A second later, Adrian appeared and without hesitation struck him hard in the jaw, sending him sprawling into the snow. Adrian scooped Lucas into his arms, checking him head to toe. "Are you okay?" Buddy Lucas sobbed but nodded, burying his face in Adrian's shoulder. Security rushed in to handle the drunken man, but Elena didn't see them. She only saw her son. She dropped to her knees, arms wide. Lucas ran to her, and she folded him into her embrace, holding him like she'd never let go again. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "It's okay, baby. I'm here. I'm here." She looked up at Adrian, her eyes burning not with anger, but with betrayal. He had promised. And in that moment, he had broken it. Adrian stood frozen, hand bloodied, lips parted as if to speak, but her eyes silenced him. No words could undo the fear she had just felt. She rose, holding Lucas tightly, and walked away without a sound. Snow crunched beneath her boots, but her heart made no noise at all. The snow crunched beneath Elena's boots as she walked swiftly toward the exit of the winter fair. Her son clutched tightly in her arms, behind her. The festive lights blurred into streaks of color. Unbeknownst to her, a local journalist covering the fair had recognized Adrian Wyndham, the CEO from headlines about the resort development. The man had witnessed the altercation with the drunken stranger and had snapped a photo of Elena, Adrian, and Lucas caught in a moment none of them had wanted the world to see. After that night, something in Elena changed. She pulled away completely. When Adrian stopped by the bakery, she didn't speak. She didn't even look at him. Her eyes, once wary but warm, now held a quiet devastation that scared him more than silence ever could. He felt it, the fear creeping in. The fear of losing them, not just Lucas, but her. The pain was sharp, deeper than any financial loss, deeper than the failure of any deal. 10 days later, the inevitable happened. The front page of the Meadowbrook Gazette screamed in bold letters, "Billionaire CEO hiding secret child in small town." Elena saw it on her phone. Her heart clenched. She had tried so hard to protect Lucas from the weight of the world Adrian came from, the world of cameras and headlines and gossip columns. a world too sharp for a child with soft dreams of astronauts and storybooks. She knew then she had to go. There was no other choice. She packed only what she needed: clothes, a few drawings, the stuffed bear from the fair. She left a short note for May, folded neatly on the kitchen counter. "Thank you for giving me a home. I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly. Elena." She told no one where she was going. Not May, not Adrian. That night, as the bus rumbled away from Meadowbrook, Elena stared out the window. Lucas slept curled against her chest, unaware of the storm that had taken away the life they had begun to build. Tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She didn't hate Adrian. She had seen the man he was trying to become. But his world, the noise, the spotlight wasn't safe for Lucas. Back in his rented house, Adrian sat numbly in front of the newspaper. The article meant nothing. The project meant nothing. The headlines could burn for all he cared. He wanted them. When he arrived at the bakery and May handed him Elena's note, he felt his knees nearly give out. Just 3 lines. 3 lines that cut deeper than any press scandal ever could. "Thank you for giving me a home. I'm sorry for leaving so suddenly." Adrian closed his eyes, gripping the note so tightly it crumpled in his palm. This wasn't something he could fix with apologies or money. If he wanted to find her, he had to become someone else, someone better. He had to change. Not to earn her forgiveness, but to prove he was finally worthy of the love he had once carelessly destroyed. He made a vow, not to chase her down to win, but to show up, again and again, until she no longer had to be afraid of him. Months passed. The first spring rain swept over Pine Hollow, a quiet village cradled in the forests of northern New England. The dirt roads turned to soft mud, and the wooden cottage nestled near the tree line breathed in the scent of renewal. It was here that Elena and Lucas had found shelter. The cottage was modest, just 2 bedrooms, a narrow porch, and a tiny vegetable patch. But it was theirs, a new beginning, a quiet place to breathe. Elena took a job at a local cafe, brewing lattes and baking fresh loaves of bread. Lucas had started at the nearby preschool and spent his afternoons drawing spaceships and building forts from couch pillows. And yet, something inside Elena remained hollow. At night, the images returned: the newspaper headline, the icy moment at the fair when she almost lost her son. But also, Adrian, not the man who had hurt her, but the one who had waited outside the bakery, who had caught Lucas when he stumbled, who had stood between a drunken stranger and her child like a storm. She stared at her cooling tea one night as the rain streaked down the window pane. Had she been too quick to leave? Had she run before giving him the chance to truly change? She shook her head, gripping the mug tighter. Fear was a scar she had learned to carry. Then a knock, sharp, sudden, startling. She rose, heart fluttering, threw on a sweater, and opened the door. Adrian Wyndham stood on the porch, soaked to the bone. Rain streamed down his face, his white shirt plastered to his skin. His dark hair dripped into his eyes, and his breath came heavy. But in those familiar gray eyes, she saw something new. Not desperation, not pride, but resolve. He had no umbrella. Rain poured down in steady sheets, soaking his clothes, dripping from his lashes, but Adrian Wyndham stood motionless on the porch of the small cottage, as if the cold meant nothing. "Elena," he said, voice low, but unwavering, "I need to talk." "Just 5 minutes." She froze, hand still on the doorknob. Her heart pounded like thunder beneath her ribs. Every instinct told her to shut the door, but his eyes, tired, sincere, pleading, made her hesitate. She crossed her arms, spine straightening. Her voice was cool, controlled. "Mr. Wyndham," she said sharply, "how did you find me? What do you want this time?" Adrian didn't move forward, didn't try to cross her boundary. He stood there, rain pooling at his feet, his figure trembling from the cold. "I hired someone," he admitted, "to find you, but not to force anything. I'm here to say what I never said before. I'm here to ask for your forgiveness." Tears welled in Elena's eyes, but she blinked them back. Forgiveness doesn't change what happened. You had your chance 3 years ago, Adrian, and you broke me. He lowered his head. His fists curled at his sides, water running down his face, dripping from the strands of black hair that clung to his skin. "I know," he said, voice raw. "I was wrong. I thought I could buy control, buy peace, buy love. I didn't see your worth until it was too late. I walked away from you and from Lucas, and I've been walking through life ever since without really living." He looked up, and this time, when his eyes met hers, they were open, unguarded. "When I found out about Lucas, it shattered everything I thought I knew. I realized I lost the only thing that ever really mattered." He stepped forward but didn't cross the line. He spoke not as a CEO or a man used to getting his way, but as someone learning how to be human. "I'm not here to drag you into my world, Elena. I want to step into yours. I want to walk Lucas to preschool. Listen to you talk about your shifts at the cafe. Sit beside you in this house and learn who you really are. I want to be someone who deserves to love you. Not the man you remember, but someone better." His words moved through her like spring wind, gentle, unsettling, awakening. She looked at him, soaked to the skin, shivering, but not turning away. She remembered the way he had searched for Lucas in the crowd, the way he had fought to protect him, the way his hands had trembled when she disappeared. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice unsteady. "I'm scared." He didn't move closer, but the air between them throbbed with intensity. "I'm scared you'll hurt me again. I'm scared for Lucas. I swear," he said, voice soft, steady. "I will never hurt you, or him. Give me a chance not to rewrite the past, but to become the man you both need. Someone better. Someone true." Elena stared at him, into him, and in his eyes, she saw the truth she had longed for. Her tears broke free, blending with the rain. She stepped onto the porch, letting it soak her sweater. She stood in front of him, inches apart now, face upturned. "Okay," she said quietly, "but if you ever hurt me or Lucas again, I won't forgive you. Ever." A smile, real, unguarded, broke across Adrian's face, not the smile of a businessman, but of a man who had found his way home. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder, almost afraid she might vanish if he moved too fast. "Thank you, Elena," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. She nodded, and for the first time, let him pull her into his arms. The rain poured around them, drenching their clothes, washing away years of pain, of silence, of things left unsaid. Later, Elena handed him a towel and led him inside. Lucas was still asleep, curled up with his stuffed bear, unaware that, just a few steps away, his mother and father had finally found their way back to each other. Adrian sat at the small kitchen table, eyes drifting over the modest home, the curtain that didn't quite reach the floor, the child's drawings on the fridge, the scent of lavender and cinnamon. "I'm staying in Pine Hollow," he said softly. "As long as it takes, whatever it takes, I'll earn this, I'll earn you." Elena looked at him, and for the first time, her smile wasn't burdened with sorrow. It was full of possibility. "Then start now," Elena said softly, standing in the doorway, her sweater soaked from the rain. be the man I can believe in. That night, under the warm kitchen light, they sat at the old table sipping tea, speaking of small, simple things, Lucas, the cafe, the rain that always seemed to dance over Pine Hollow this time of year. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt something she hadn't dared to trust in years: hope, faint, fragile, but real. Spring came to Pine Hollow like a whispered blessing. The breeze carried the scent of pine and wildflowers, stirring the curtains in Elena's cottage, where life had begun to feel whole again, not perfect, but full. The house was no longer just a refuge for her and Lucas. It had become a place of quiet beginnings where Adrian Wyndham, a man once wrapped in steel and solitude, was slowly learning what it meant to belong. After that night on the porch, Adrian rented a small apartment just down the road from the Hollow Bean Cafe, where Elena worked, not for convenience, but commitment. Each morning, they walked together to open the cafe, Adrian rolling up his sleeves beside her, far from his corner office and boardroom walls. Elena, in her green apron, brewed espresso with graceful rhythm, kneading dough for warm cinnamon buns. Adrian, in a borrowed apron 2 sizes too small, fumbled his way through the espresso machine, forgetting names, spilling oat milk, burning his fingers but smiling through it all. "Still think you're CEO of anything," Elena teased one morning, wiping foam from his wrist. He grinned and leaned in to kiss her forehead. "I'm just trying to make your world mine." In the afternoons, they walked hand in hand to Lucas's preschool. The nearly 4-year-old would sprint to the gate, his voice echoing, "Mommy, Mr. Adrian," his little arms reaching up for Adrian to carry him on his shoulders, pointing out birds and clouds that looked like dragons. At home, the evenings were filled with spaghetti dinners and drawings on the kitchen floor. Once, Lucas handed them a crayon masterpiece, the 3 of them on a rocket ship, flying through stars. Elena and Adrian exchanged a glance, soft, stunned, full of quiet joy. But healing wasn't instant, and it was never linear. Some nights, Elena sat on the porch long after Lucas had gone to sleep, staring out into the rain. "Are you sure?" she asked him once, her voice barely above the breeze. "This life, this small house, cafe shifts, no wealth or power, is this really enough for you?" Adrian sat beside her, took her hand without hesitation. "Elena," he said, eyes searching hers, "I had everything, money, status, and I was hollow. But now, with you and Lucas, I finally feel full. This is all I want." She looked at him, saw the truth in his eyes, but some wounds, even when healing, still ached. She needed time. Adrian understood that now. He was also learning what it meant to be a father. Lucas loved him, but sometimes the boy's questions pierced deeper than any boardroom battle. "Mr. Adrian," he asked one evening, clutching a toy rocket, "why didn't you live with me and Mommy?" Before Adrian paused. "I got lost," he said finally, kneeling beside him. "But now I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." They spent hours in the backyard, Adrian teaching Lucas to throw a baseball, clapping when he got it right, catching him in strong arms when he ran, shouting, "I did it, I really did it." Adrian held him tightly, eyes burning, understanding in that moment what it truly meant to be a father, not by name, but by presence. He didn't stop there. To show Elena his change, he started with the little things. He helped her fix the creaky garden gate, repainted the porch railing, tried baking beside her, even if he usually ended up sneezing in a cloud of flour. And every time Elena laughed, genuine and free, it felt like sunlight through a window he had once believed would never open again. Adrian Wyndham turned down one of the biggest deals in Wyndham Holdings history to stay in Pine Hollow. Instead of flying back to boardrooms and skyscrapers, He delegated control to his team in the city and chose to remain beside Elena and Lucas, in the quiet rhythm of their everyday lives, inspired by Elena's strength and the loneliness she had endured. Adrian launched a small local initiative, Haven of Hope, a nonprofit supporting single mothers and children without families. "I don't want anyone else to feel as alone as you once did," he told her, eyes soft. And for the first time, Elena hugged him without hesitation. Their greatest test came one chilly spring night when Lucas caught a cold that quickly turned into a fever. His small body burned with heat, and his soft cries pierced through the walls of their cottage. Elena and Adrian stayed up through the night, taking turns wiping his forehead, whispering comfort, checking his temperature. When Lucas finally woke up weak but smiling, whispering, "Mommy, Mr. Adrian," Elena looked at Adrian and saw his eyes wet with relief, brimming with something deeper than worry. "Thank you," she whispered, quietly, using his name with no wall between them. Adrian kissed the top of her head, holding her in the glow of morning light. One soft afternoon, Adrian surprised them with a picnic in the backyard. Elena's homemade bread filled the air with warmth, and freshly pressed apple juice shimmered in glass jars beneath paper lanterns. Lucas chased butterflies through the grass, waving a stick like a space explorer. Elena sat beside Adrian on the blanket, leaning into his shoulder as they watched their son laugh under the open sky. "Do you think we'll be okay?" she asked softly. Adrian took her hand, steady and sure. "We'll be okay, Elena, because we have each other." That evening, after Lucas had fallen asleep wrapped in blankets and storybooks, Elena and Adrian sat on the porch beneath the starlit sky. The pines whispered gently in the wind. She rested her head on his shoulder, listening to the rhythm of their quiet. "I used to think I'd never trust anyone again," she said, voice low. "But you're changing that." Adrian wrapped his arm around her, pulling her closer. "And I won't stop trying, Elena. Not as long as it's for you and Lucas." Under the stars, they didn't need promises of perfection. What they had was real, rooted in small joys: spaghetti dinners, shared laughter, block towers, and walks through the rain. That was love. That was family. As summer unfurled its golden light over Pine Hollow, the town shimmered beneath the sun, and the garden behind Elena's cottage burst into bloom. The porch, freshly painted by Adrian himself, welcomed morning coffees and bedtime stories. The curtains danced in the breeze. The house, once a place of survival, had become the heart of a growing family. Mornings were filled with brewing coffee and playful squabbles over toast, afternoons with tossed baseballs and drawings in the garden. Evenings brought books and warm tea, Lucas's laughter echoing through the walls, and finally, after months of Adrian showing up again and again, Elena's heart had opened fully. One soft June afternoon, with sunlight filtering through the pines, Adrian took Elena and Lucas into the garden. Lucas, brandishing his favorite plastic stick like a space sword, squealed in delight when he saw the blanket spread out under the trees. It was topped with Elena's warm bread and cider, and lanterns swayed gently above. She thought it was another picnic, until Adrian dropped to one knee. Her breath caught. From his pocket, he pulled a small velvet box. Inside lay a silver ring, delicate and engraved with daisies, simple, elegant, just like the flowers she loved in her garden. "Elena," he said, his voice steady, deep. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. I can't promise you the whole world, but I promise to love and protect you and Lucas for the rest of my life. Will you marry me?" Elena covered her mouth, her eyes shimmering with tears. Beside her, Lucas looked up, grinning, eyes wide. "Mom! Mary! Mr. Adrian!" "I want him to be my dad," Lucas shouted. jumping up with joy, his voice echoing across the backyard. Elena laughed through her tears, her heart full. She knelt down in front of Adrian and pulled him into an embrace. "Yes, Adrian," she whispered, voice trembling with happiness. "I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger silver, engraved with tiny daisies, and kissed her softly. Lucas squealed and dove between them, knocking all three onto the blanket in a burst of laughter beneath the warm afternoon sun. A few weeks later, they were married right there in the garden. It wasn't grand or luxurious, just a quiet, beautiful celebration with a handful of people who had walked beside them on their journey, May from Meadowbrook, co-workers from the Hollow Bean Cafe, and friendly neighbors from Pine Hollow. But the love, it overflowed. Elena wore a simple white dress that brushed her ankles, her brown hair flowing loose beneath a crown of fresh daisies from her garden. Adrian, in a light gray suit, stood beneath a wooden arch he had built with his own hands, his eyes never leaving hers. Lucas, proudly wearing a tiny vest, scattered rose petals with uncoordinated joy, shouting. Mom married Dad as he grinned from ear to ear. They exchanged vows under the golden sky. "Adrian," Elena said, her voice trembling with emotion, "you gave me a family. I promise to walk beside you, always through every season." He took her hands gently, his eyes full of tears. "Elena, you are my light. I promise to love and protect you and Lucas for the rest of my life." They exchanged rings, and as the final rays of sunlight kissed their faces, they sealed their promise with a kiss, surrounded by clapping hands and the sound of genuine, unfiltered happiness. The reception was warm and simple cupcakes baked by Elena and Adrian, apple cider in mason jars, and soft violin music played by a neighbor under string lights that swayed with the breeze. Lucas ran barefoot through the garden with his friends, his laughter a melody more beautiful than any song. Adrian never let go of Elena's hand. He pulled her into a slow dance on the grass and whispered against her temple. "Thank you for giving me a home." Elena leaned into his chest and smiled. "Thank you for becoming mine. That night, under the hush of stars." Adrian carried a sleepy Lucas in his arms, the little boy still clutching the stuffed bear from the winter fair. Elena walked beside them, and together, they tucked their son into bed, watching him sleep under the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Adrian wrapped his arms around her from behind. "I never thought I could be this happy," he whispered. Elena turned and kissed him gently. "Neither did I." Adrian. In the months that followed, they fully embraced their new life. Elena opened a cozy little bakery next to the cafe, naming it Pine Blossom, filling it with the scent of cookies, pies, and stories shared over coffee. Adrian painted the walls himself, carried sacks of flour, and fixed anything that needed mending. He continued to lead Haven of Hope, now with even greater purpose bringing Elena and Lucas along to events, letting them see the heart behind his mission. Lucas, now proudly calling Adrian Dad, talked endlessly about camping trips and the puppy he had always dreamed of, and under the summer moon. Elena and Adrian sat together on the porch, watching the stars through the pine canopy above. They didn't talk of fame or riches, just simple dreams, a beach trip, a bigger garden, maybe, someday, a little sibling for Lucas. "We don't need everything," Elena said, her fingers laced with his. "Just the right people." Adrian pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "And I've already found mine. Beneath the stars of Pine Hollow." They knew their joy didn't come from perfection, but from the little things. Lucas's laughter, morning kisses in the kitchen, a home built on forgiveness, effort, and the kind of love that chooses to stay, even after storms. It was real, and they would cherish it one day at a time. And so, beneath the quiet pines of a small town, love found its way home. Not through grand gestures or perfect timing, but through forgiveness, effort, and the courage to try again. Elena and Adrian didn't start with a fairy tale. They started with broken pieces, but together they built something stronger. A family, a life, a love that wasn't flawless, but real. Maybe that's what we're all searching for. Not perfection, but people who stay, people who choose us, again and again. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of the power of love after pain, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more soul-stirring stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and until next time, may your heart always find its way home.